Is Doug Cliggott, U.S. equity strategist at Credit Suisse. He's the most bearish strategist that we survey at the 14 big brokerages on Wall Street. Doug, great to have you here. You are bearish. Is it because of, as Steve Schwartzman said, Europe is the most corrosive problem? Is it because of that, or is it also because of our domestic problems?
It's actually both of those and then a little bit more.
What else is there?
Well, if you look at leading indicators of growth literally around the world, whether it's in Europe, whether it's for here in the United States, whether it's for countries like China, Brazil, every big economy, indicators are pointing towards slower and slower growth. And I think that, to us, is one of really the biggest issues because, not only is it 17 parliaments within Europe that need to wrestle with what to do there,
right.
It's governments everywhere are really struggling what to do right now.
It's funny, and you mentioned China. I think we all think China is the great hope out there, and it's going to rescue everybody from all that ails us. That's not going to happen, though. Even with their dramatic growth, even with the emerging economies, it's not enough, is it?
Well, I think, in all economic patterns, there's sort of the trend and then the cycle.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's been real hard for investors, what happened in 2008 put every big economy, they synchronized us all. So we all had a great 18 months going up. Now we're all slowing down together, and that makes finding places in the equity market sort of to hide really, really tough.
You can feel that.
Hey, Doug, I got to ask you about your earnings forecast. It's $81 for next year. And if you look through all of the strategists, literally all of them are $100 or more. So you're an outlier here, like a major outlier. Why the $20 difference?
Well, Matt, what we did to come up with that roughly $80 figure is we put out 5 different possible scenarios. The $81 number is, in a sense, a weighted average of those 5 scenarios. And in the way we look at it, the consensus is really based on, I guess I'd call it a very happy-go-lucky view of the world, that we're going to end up accelerating and growth is going to be good next year. Our base case is we're going to struggle to grow, but if we actually end up in an outright recession, then history says earnings will actually come in below that $80 level. So I know we're way below consensus, but we don't really view that as a very aggressive call right now.
So you're saying it could be even worse. I mean, what, $60, $70? Barry Knapp has 105. Binky Chadha has 106. I mean, Thomas Lee 105. Every big bank says 100 and change, and you're looking at 81 and saying for you that's just a medium case scenario.
That's what we come up with, Matt. Again, what we have to go with is history. And if we actually, if Europe's in a recession, unfortunately, if we were to slide into a recession next year, if in effect, we had a global recession, S&P 500 earnings tend to come down 35%, not 10, not 20, but, 30 or 40. That's not our base case, but it seems to me, trying to anticipate what happens, the best we can do is outline possibilities. Could it be 105? Absolutely. But that would, in our eyes anyway, take a sharp improvement in growth everywhere. And we just don't see indicators of that.
Where at this point could that growth come from? As you lay out your scenario, we're dealing with Europe. That's not going to be a quick fix. None of the situation in the United States is going to be a quick fix. Where does that growth come from?
Well, and Carol, I think sort of to pile on, what's really unique, at least in my lifetime, it's very odd that policymakers are actually tightening fiscal policy into slowdowns. That's why Europe's slowing down. That's one of the reasons we're slowing down.
You don't think they're going to reverse that there's going to be enough pressure in terms of what's going on in Europe that they're going to have to reverse that?
What seems to be the case, realistically, is with the IMF involved, they're saying more austerity, right? And
right.
Here we're seeing tightening right now really just at the state and local level. But every state, not every state, about 75% of states have been tightening their budgets. School teachers are losing their jobs, and so I think that's one of the reasons we're slowing now.
David Rubenstein, who talked this morning from the Carlyle Group, he said we really never came out of a recession. We never really saw that. He thinks we're still in a recession at this point. Are we, in your view, in 6 months from now, 3 months from now, we're going to officially be talking about being back in a recession?
Honestly, I don't know, but I think...
But your estimates are pretty bearish.
Well, to get an $81 number, that works with positive growth, but not very positive growth.
Yeah.
Again, if we end up negative, Carol, I think the $81 number we're working with is probably too high.
It's an upbeat number then.
Yeah.
So, Doug, they talked about a lot of different specific companies, specific stories today. But when you look at the sectors out there, I mean, what's your allocation at this point?
Right now, Carol, we're recommending overweights. So the most defensive sectors, our biggest overweights are healthcare, focus on pharmaceuticals. Consumer staples would focus on tobacco and beverages.
This is because of your bearish stance at this point?
It's because of our concern about the earnings profile. You tend to want to own stable businesses if you're worried about slower earnings growth ahead. And I think, picking up on the basic material stocks, when global growth is slowing, industrial commodity prices like copper go down, it's really hard for these stocks to work, no matter how attractively valued they are. You want to own them
right
at the bottom of the cycle as we're turning up, not as we're slowing down.
Right, which is not how it is right now.
Not where we are right now.
Got it. Is it, Doug, just a matter of time before Meredith's predictions play out here?
I think the key word in that sentence is time. State governments tend to react a lot better than the federal government. And so I think, to me, the economic casualty from the state and local budget situation is the labor market. If you look at the payroll reports that we get once a month, we've been running at minus 30, minus 40,000 jobs each month from state and local governments. And, the hard thing there is it's not obvious. Those are good paying jobs. It's not obvious where those people losing their jobs are going to get their next job.
Hey, Doug,
yeah.
let me just ask, as Meredith Whitney's making a bearish call. We see Nuria Robini's been making bearish calls for a long time. One of our regular guests, Kamal Sri Kumar, has been making bearish calls for a long time, and you've been making bearish calls for a long time too, right? And we now are getting viewers writing in and say, hey, Doug Cliggott said there's going to be relentless downward pressure on profits back in July of 09, but profits grew 176% in the last quarter of 09, and 50% in the first quarter of 2010, and 50% in the second quarter of 2010, and on, right?
Right.
Is it just a point? Are you saying like things are going to be really bad someday, but you just aren't getting the timing right, or what's the problem?
Well, I guess when we try to understand the profit cycle, Matt, what we missed in the spring of 09, we didn't think we would get the amount of fiscal stimulus we ended up getting. To us, the magic of this profit cycle has been the federal government borrowing $1.4 trillion a year, taking that money from the bond market and, in effect, dealing it around in the economy. And so the corporate sector was able to cut costs a lot, but demand didn't break down because the federal government was filling the void. The reason we think we really are slowing down on earnings now is because the federal budget deficit's no longer growing. And in fact, it's starting to shrink. And what could really make profits slow, maybe even more than we think, is if we get a lot of fiscal tightening in the U.S. in 2012. So absolutely.
Do you expect that?
I don't know how you predict that.
Yeah.
What we have right now is the House, the Senate, and the administration aren't even talking.
What about, you said you missed all of the amount of stimulus. If we potentially go back into a recession, Doug, couldn't we see more stimulus, and could that cause you to revise your outlook?
If we were to get legislation in the U.S. Congress that said we're going to ramp up spending,
hard to imagine with the debate, but who knows? Stranger things have happened.
But I think if that were to happen, we would have to revise our earnings. Would be happy to. What we didn't anticipate in early 09 was the order of magnitude of the fiscal stimulus that would end up coming.